Okay, well, today we're going to be looking at zombies in Western culture, a 21st century crisis. So I have been engaged in the study of the work of one Dr. John Fakey for several years, and I'm taking one of his courses, which is coming up, and in the process of wrestling more deeply with some of his published work, um, mostly in, it's previously mostly been in video form. I would say that I've engaged in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis and After Socrates, and there's something about the written format which yeah allows a different vantage point or point of view to get to know a certain body of work. And in a period of wrestling with certain problems or considerations that come out of getting to know a key essay in particular, Dialectic into Dialogos and the Pragmatics of No-Thingness in a Time of Crisis. And as a way to approach that, which I will talk about in a forthcoming way. I have spent some time a few months ago getting to know this 2017 publication, and I'm gonna be reading it out and exploring it as a way to get toward my own way of understanding this body of work, um, which is very much my own and you know not required by anyone to sign on to or agree with what I'm going to express. I guess part of the context here is that I want to try to like unveil or uncover a particular concern, like the concern with nihilism that comes through the work, um, and try to debride the participating in that nihilism from participating in what can come to be a solution. Um, and I feel that that theme is becomes a lot more explicit in their later work, um, and in that essay that I named, and it's a bit more implicit in this. And I guess as part of a like deep engagement with Jung as well, I sort of found ways to what I would call sort of reading the unconscious, or like um, allowing the text to speak to me in a different way than was perhaps consciously intended by the authors, and finding that to be fruitful and interesting. Yeah, and I guess to say it might seem at points as if this is sort of pushback on the argument, and not at all. I mean, I sort of studied and been deeply engaged with John's work for many years and have learned an incredible amount from what is a remarkable teacher and truly an amazing human being. Um, and this this expression is simply my own way as someone with a far more limited intellect, um, to try to come to terms, my own terms, with what is being expressed here. Um, yeah, and so that this, if you like, if I do tend to be psychoanalytical to a degree, and that can be a weakness and a strength. Um, it can push people away, and I have to wield it carefully or judiciously. And what I have to say is sort of in no way invalidates the argument that is presented here, and which is like the symptomatology of the meaning crisis is detailed, in other publications, like one key publication in particular, diagnosing the current age symptomatology of the meaning crisis. Um, but I just feel like I wanted to quote a couple of things from that article. Actually, the first one being, um, we attend to diagnosis with the spirit of Epicurus, observing the philosopher as a physician for the soul, observing the philosopher as a physician for the soul. Likewise, if discussions of the crisis seem recondite, it's because indistinction inheres the character of their subject. We have lost a common language to index disorders of the spirit, and this enfeebles the project of the philosopher physician, the commutation of suffering through recognition. This enfeebles the project of the philosopher physician, the commutation of suffering through recognition. And what I'm intending to highlight there is that one of my, I'm sort of anathema to the academic spirit in a certain way. Um, Despite being a very sort of heady, mental, philosophical, abstract person by temperament, I have a feeling that mm, yeah, sort of becoming more closer with each other, getting to know each other more deeply is a key part of getting out of the existential trap that we have gotten ourselves into. And that requires sort of transparency, and it can push against privacy unless we're careful about how to navigate between transparency and privacy. And I just feel that the academic veneer can get in the way a lot of the time. And I have to say, I see that in John. And as far as I understand, he is in a process right now of on his um, walking the philosophical Silk Road pilgrimage of wanting to allow himself to be um, touched more deeply by the personal connections and his personal involvement, um, which is a kind of existential stake in the project that he's got going on. Um, and this to me is deeply encouraging. Um, Whereas I feel that the yeah, for myself, I would not want to. I don't know. It's tricky, right? Because everyone needs an identity or a persona, but and it's connected with our finitude. We need to be finite and bounded by our finite identities. But I would hate for such an identity to hold one back from genuine transcendence. But yes, and so my keys, if you will, in no way invalidate the truth of the argument that I'm going to offer. Um, Sorry, in no way invalidate the truth of the argument offered in the text. It merely augments that argument, I would say. Um, so I would say I've written that we are out of touch. We're out of touch, as they argue, largely by virtue of the medium of text and by the intervention, the unhelpful intervention of professional personae. So we're out of touch by virtue of the medium that we're engaging in and by virtue of the intervention of unhelpful professional personae, meaning the absence of true personality or soul, you could say, if you like. And I consider it to be literally vital to understand who they are, the authors, I mean, um, and the relevance of their argument to them. And I feel that only in the context of this truer and more vulnerable and more human picture can the significance of the argument be properly situated, meaning properly placed or properly homed, and thereby truly known, understood in its substance. Meaning that I don't want to be offering anything that is, I'm not intending to give any accusation or to push anyone away. I'm intending to get closer, um, or to rehabilitate. And this is ultimately going to be performative contradiction on my part unless I can find a way to share to the same degree. And we'll see how that goes too, also forthcoming. So it's going to take a little while because there's a lot here. So you're going to need to have this text and be studying it. And so full acknowledgements to the authors, John Vervaeke, Christopher Mastropietro, and Philip Mesevic. Can't pronounce that right, but that's okay. And their work has just been so powerful and valuable for me for many years. So full endorsement. And so in this text, they um, describe the myth or the mythogram of the zombie as a modern symbol, as a kind of symptom or a myth that expresses the zeitgeist of our time, namely the meaning crisis, the loss of meaning. Um, Check this out. We propose that the cultural phenomenon of the zombie has provided us with a constellation of four intersecting symbols for a modern human ethos, and that these symbols represent a crisis of worldview that has no precedent in modern Western civilization. Yeah, we'll provide a preliminary discussion of the origins of the crisis and argue that it's extant in the personal, social, political, and religious domains of life in which we participate. Um, I won't keep reading this introduction. I'm going to jump. So, yeah, if you're continuing with this expression, this recording, I guess, um, I'm not sure what it is, which is why I'm hesitating. I don't know. Like, it's sure it's a recording, but it's not only a recording, you know? Um, it's going to be helpful to have some familiarity with their work, and with the text itself. Yeah, and so one of the main premises is that they're going to be, yeah, what I call listening to the unconscious, let's say. So voices or meanings that are present that are not necessarily the most explicitly intended meanings, that are offered by the authors. So I'm going to read, it mainly starts around page 15, what I have to say, but I'm going to read from section 2, which is a transition in metaphors, a brief history of monster zeitgeists. That reading will help us to situate ourselves. So it goes, we are surrounded by strangers, but for stretches of our history, strangers have not been as strange as they are now. There have been epochs of culture when we have sustained a concerted frame of reference that made us known and knowable to one another, wherever we lived. Even when we shared very little, we could be sure to find some universal commons that would guarantee us familiarity with an unfamiliar person. For much of our recent past, we in the West lived under the canopy of Christendom. However varied or populated our society was, other human beings always offered a degree of predictability as long as they identified as Christians. We could always anticipate a median grade of behavior. and presuppose binary limits on a spectrum between the sacred and the profane. Sustaining our religious commons was not as much about celebrating common principles as much as it was about extending our scope of acquaintance. The extended family metaphors used in religious discourse were very provident in fostering this acquaintance. Strangeness was never absolute strangeness. Strangeness was never absolute strangeness, and we could find others intelligible to the degree that they assured a comprehensible, if not always amiable, interaction. More contemporary cultural canopies came in the form of ethnic or civic membership. But because citizenship and ethnicity are often more involuntary, they're not as grounded in principled participation. They're not as comprehensively penetrating, and therefore less powerful than religious bonds. Thus, they're much more susceptible to the vicissitudes of political and economic change. One of the more puissant cultural canopies in the 20th century was the phenomenon of Americanism. Particularly in the latter half of the century, being American connoted a strong apotheosis of values and perspective for most Americans. In most cases, if two Americans had diverging interests, backgrounds, or orientations, they could be sure to touch base on certain convictions held mutually fundamental. Significantly, many attribute the vitality of Americanness to the influence of a vernacular religiosity, the faith in America. Yet, as Dreyfus and Kelly observe, we no longer share a uniform worldview that guarantees agreement on sacredness or standards of behavior. We're talking about a changing worldview rather than a single event or moment in history. This has been a gradual process. Now, the powerful 20th century Americanism is nearly a misnomer. Two persons can share its title and share almost nothing else. The alienation we feel in everyday life suggests that experiences of foreignness, exposure to otherness of persons or place, are becoming inherent in domestic life. This dovetails with burgeoning literature discussing the disintegration of social candor, common courtesy, and a sense of locality that made America perceive itself as a neighborhood of frankness and fluid exchange. Public intimacy is what is at stake. Public intimacy is what is at stake. The feeling of recognition, understanding, and being understood by other human beings. Zombies are not the first monsters to broach this theme. By and large, they've taken over from a villain H.G. Wells introduced in his 1898 novel War of the Worlds. It has inspired numerous film adaptations since its original publication. Extraterrestrial invasions gained tremendous popularity in American cinema, particularly in the latter half of the 20th century with the onset of the Cold War. As the West drew its cultural boundaries more guardedly, the alien seemed to be an effective mask for the prevailing wind of wariness and paranoia and the fear of outsiders and espionage. Stories of alien invasion struck compelling affinities with real-life suspicions. Adversaries from the outside were trying to infiltrate our society in order to advance theirs, to dissolve our systems and propagate their own, and to estrange us from one another by diluting our fellowship. Brief interlude to say that the interpretation of the relevance of that particular passage to this particular expression would be that to the degree that the adversary is present in my speech, the symptom of that would be that we are estranged from one another by the dilution of our fellowship. So where the imposition of my unmetabolized shadow material, where to the degree that that pushes people away by exposing in some way, that is actually a symptom itself of the meaning crisis, um, which is hopefully why my focus on like there's a need, a preference, an orientation that I have for closeness, and hopefully that comes from a heart-centered place and a place that feels non-invasive. Um, just want to be very explicit about that. Anyway, we were saying stories of alien invasion struck compelling affinities with real-life suspicions. Adversaries from the outside, were trying to infiltrate our society in order to advance theirs, to dissolve our systems and propagate their own, and to estrange us from one another, and to estrange us from one another by diluting our fellowship. These suspicions were significant in that they inadvertently discouraged intimacy. People were not guaranteed to be trustworthy. Many were not who they said they were, and it was difficult to gauge a stranger's memberships and commitments. It was possible that your new friend was not the American she said she was, and that she had come under the canopy to sabotage its integrity. One of the most dramatic fictionalizations of this kind of mania was depicted in a famous episode of The Twilight Zone, where a few well-disguised aliens interfered with technology to cause an outbreak of disquiet on an American residential street, engendering enmity between the neighbors in order to weaken their awareness of a coming invasion. Zombies take up many of these traits, but they make some significant departures fit for a post-Cold War, post-globalized, post-Christian, and as some people say, post-modern world. The first evident difference is that zombies don't trouble to conceal their invasion. It wouldn't occur to them, and unlike most diabolical imperial alien overlords, zombies don't have a reason for invading in the first place. Well, I do have a reason, actually. And yeah, I want to answer some of these questions that are coming up right away, right? Suspicions are present in that they discourage intimacy, so people were not guaranteed to be trustworthy. I can't assure anyone of my trustworthiness because it's not relational. Like someone watching this might have no idea who I am and what I'm up to. I can try to ameliorate that by situating us. It's currently the 21st of June, 2025. My name's Sam. I'm from Melbourne, Australia, but I'm currently in Amsterdam in Holland. Um, I'm a psychology student with Australian College of Psychologists in Australia, and I am what am I up to? I've been wrestling with the diagnoses of the current world situation ever since Jordan Peterson showed up around sort of 2018, 19 for me. And then through John Vervaeke's work, through Daniel Schmachtenberger, Jamie Wheal, Jordan Hall, have been sort of going through a process of personal maturation um, and grappling with the existential situation of our time while learning a whole bunch of different practices that help to ameliorate its symptomatology, um, namely circling with Kai Sengstock, rebirthing breathwork, meditation, yoga, dance, and anything else. John Vervaeke's dialectic into dialogos has been an important part of that. And I have a distinct sense of the advent of the sacred and what I would call the ongoing rebirth of God, which is occurring in our time. And I have a concern that the collective human response to the meta crisis has been woefully inadequate, and that we in some way need to willfully choose. We need to properly place our will or our agency, our identity, if you like, um, in order to um, initiate a bootstrapping process in human consciousness that could allow us to respond to the situation. That's a sort of normative orientation, if you like. That's part of the context. I know that's a bit vague and broad, but importantly, part of we have like a fragmentation of worldviews, which they actually talk about in like this um, echo chambers, left, right, and center, and everyone believes different things. And so like I can share with you about what I believe, but it's kind of like that's kind of not the point. We're talking about these huge changes that are going on in the world that are going on sort of irrespective of what people believe. Um, But yes, it does seem to me that like it seems to me that the future of the human race is in jeopardy, and I feel concerned about that. I'm interested in exploring what can be done about it by humans. Um, and yeah, I think there's a part of that which looks like getting out of our own way. Um, Otherwise, just to say, I've just learned from that generation of thinkers, of those people that I mentioned for a long time, and part of this for me is a sort of stepping into my self process of starting to respond to the global and personal existential situation um, myself, rather than waiting for other people to handle it. Um, so I realize that that's not really like a sufficient basis for trust, but it's like it's a way to start getting to know who I am. Um, Many were not who they said they were. Well, of course, there's a lot to me that's not what I like. That's just a story that I told you. So, but everything that we tell each other is a story, just like narrative identity, this sort of thing. It's difficult to gauge a stranger's memberships and commitments. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, there are many people that I care about in this world that I feel membership and commitment to. I do have a family. They're currently in Australia. Um, yeah, and I would say like I'm responsible for maintaining an international network of colleagues and associates, friends, that I feel deeply connected to. And that is a kind of membership and commitment. And I actually manage a online community that where we do circling and dialogos and sort of thing. Um, that's been part of it for me. Yeah, it's possible that we've come under the canopy to sabotage its integrity. That's not my intention. I guess following on from Daniel in psychological drivers of the meta crisis, there I'm attuned to a sense of inadequacy that I feel in the individual pursuit of wisdom to um like so that there is a sense of inadequacy, and I'm attuning to yeah, if we can we really solve nihilism? Is I mean, I know it's not. Can we really respond to nihilism, and what would that look like? And I think there's a deep confrontation with nihilism that runs through the core of John's work, and shows up more explicitly in that paper that I mentioned, Dialectic into Dialogos and the Pragmatics of Nothingness in a Time of Crisis, which I'm going to talk about, and this is a way of getting into that. I'm not intending to sabotage the integrity of of what's emerging. Um, on the contrary, my intention would be to deepen it and explore some of its aspects. Um, and it like I'm sort of pushing around the edges and seeing what I can find. And if I don't find anything, great. That's awesome, right? Um, Here to help, hopefully. I hope that it helps. Yeah. In order to engendering enmity between neighbors in order to weaken their awareness of a coming invasion. If anyone's been able to watch this, we're definitely on the same team. So yeah, I don't want to be against anyone that's present. Um, and zombies don't trouble to conceal their invasion. Well, I won't trouble to conceal mine. Okay, let's continue. Just checking what time it is. 1:38. Go 20 more minutes. So section 3 on page 13 is entitled The Four Symbols of the Zombie Metaphor. Following Christopher Morwen, we note that while there's been much academic discussion of zombie movies, there's been little examination of the zombie itself, prompting us to analyze the zombie as a symbol in itself. Motivation is not all that the zombie lacks. As a symbol of the loss of meaning, the zombie embodies a plethora of vacancies, empty placeholders for the building blocks of meaning. Something I want to mention right at the beginning here is that, and this will come out more when I talk about that paper, but there's a sort of distinction between the first person and the third person. Um, where the third person is more of a involves perspectival knowing and involves presence, whereas the first person in some way seems to involve um, propositional knowing and yeah, and it's like there's a way that from the first person point of view we might be able to utter truths, but we may not be able to be present enough. Um, however, I want to make a link between sort of multiplicity and the first person and unity and the third person. So there's a way that I'm invoking this sort of unconscious or embodied unity that can be felt um, at a meta perspectival third person level. Um, I just want to name that and sort of leave it there and come back to it later. Um, 3.1, the first symbol, semiosis of the zombie. Okay, so what is it about zombies? Why are they relevant? Why do they speak to us of this crisis that we're, mini crisis that we're in? Um, Number one, zombies don't talk. They aren't mute or reticent. They simply have no language. They have nothing to say. They don't transmit gists of conversation. Crucially, they do the opposite. They transmit their own vacuity. They transmit their own vacuity. They communicate their incommunicability. The zombie's most marked pathology is that it lacks intelligibility. Well, I hope that even if this is uh, convoluted and like lo-fi, that it is actually graspable. Um, I hope I'm not transmitting my own vacuity. I hope that I am sharing something that has genuine substance. That's certainly my intention and my aspiration. There's a way that I'm intending in my sharing to hopefully demonstrate non-participation in the symptomatology of the mini crisis, and instead demonstrate participation in what's next. But one of the things might be that demonstration of participation in what's next might be only possible at a sub-propositional level. So there might be a way that all the stuff that I'm saying doesn't matter, and that's okay. Yeah, the zombie's most marked pathology is that it lacks intelligibility. I hope that I am able, I hope that I am intelligible, but it's not for me to decide. The contrast here that I wanted to invoke was Mr. Bean. Mr. Bean is funny to everyone because he doesn't talk, but he is intelligible to everyone. And so the zombie is a sort of the antithesis of Mr. Bean, which is really interesting actually. Like Mr. Bean as a comedic character is full of life and inspires laughter, right? Um, Interesting. I never thought of Mr. Bean as a symbol of vitality before, but there you go. Number two, zombies are communal. Zombies are communal with a twist. They possess the momentum and self-organization of culture without the narrative imagination that gathers common purpose. Hence, zombies are like culture gone awry. What does that mean? So, zombies, they move together, and there's a way that culture tells us what to do, where we're going, and how to be together, which they refer to as momentum and self-organization of culture. Which zombies have this momentum and self-organization, but they don't have the narrative imagination. They don't have the story that goes along with that gathers common purpose. Um, Hence, they're like culture gone awry. Quote, they're communal creatures in that they vaguely share proximity, but there's no accord among them. This might point to one of the symptoms of digital intimacy, where we're sort of vaguely here together, kind of, but not really, in the sense that there's a screen, but there's no accord among them. They cannot read in or reach out. They cannot read in. They cannot read in or reach out to one another. I'm hoping that by this, I'm demonstrating that we can read into one another, even in this medium. Um, but let's see. And hopefully we can reach out to one another as well. They do not coordinate to achieve concurrence. This is about zombies. They are in company but not together. They're in company but not together. They're surrounded, but each alone they lack culture. Yeah, I mean, to the degree that the emergence of the sacred is taking place in online distributed communities, this is actually true of us, in the sense of like we're in company here, but we're not really together. Um, we're we're surrounded, but in what way are we surrounded? Well, we're surrounded by everything that's around us and surrounded by whoever we're gathering with online, but each of us is still alone in our own little place, which means that we lack culture. Um, yeah, so these are like qualities, qualities of zombies. They don't talk, they're communal, that are relevant to the mini crisis, that is, and three and four. Three, zombies are homeless. Three, zombies are homeless. Zombies do not have lairs, nests, coffins, castles, or caves. They do not retreat anywhere as sun breaks the horizon. I have a cave. This is my little coffin or castle, if you like, my lair. Yeah, it's a student room in a sublet in Amsterdam. Anyway, zombies, they do not retreat anywhere as sun breaks the horizon, as the moon breaks the clouds, or as the spring breaks the winter. Zombies drift. They're equally suited and unsuited to the ground they occupy. They do not have province in any one space. They do not have propriety for any one person. There's nothing whatsoever about a zombie that appears to belong to the world. A zombie simply shuffles, bungles absently from one place to the next. If zombies were human, they might be feeling a little uprooted. But perhaps we can understand a portion of their plight, not belonging anywhere, being from anywhere. This is precisely part of the encroaching foreignness we described in section 2. Zombies lack home. I certainly relate to all of this in the context of traveling around for several months to years through the world, and there is a sense of not really belonging. At the same time, I do feel a deep sense of rootedness and connection to a particular place in the Yarra Valley in Melbourne, Australia. I grew up on a sheep and cattle farm there, and I can really feel both sides of this. Like I definitely participate as a citizen of the world, let's say, in something which is much larger than myself. And I'm hoping to demonstrate my worthiness to belong to the community of humans. Um, but we are beset by the qualities of zombiehood, and not belonging anywhere is certainly a part of that, and it has been for me. Um, but to say there's nothing whatsoever about a zombie that appears to belong in the world, well, hopefully I'm not completely a zombie because there's maybe something about me that appears to belong in the world. I hope. But yeah, they're equally suited and unsuited to the ground they occupy. I fit in everywhere but nowhere. This is my experience. Number four, zombies eat brains. The appetite of a zombie is a very particular kind of appetite. No matter how much a zombie devours, it will continue feeding for as long as it is able. Its gourmandizing is indiscriminate and voracious, and its famishment apparently bottomless. But it is insubstantial. The zombie represents raw consumption. It does not seem to imbibe the things it consumes, it simply extinguishes them. The zombie never stops eating, but never grows or changes. In its insatiability, the zombie has put its face to the disorder of addiction. It craves with absolute singularity, and its craving becomes its nature. It wants to have, but never to be. It's constantly filling, but never gets full. The zombie's lack has become a hunger. In fact, in one pivotal scene in Day of the Dead, quote, the pointlessness of the zombie appetite is made apparent as one captured zombie continues to try to eat despite the fact that its internal organs have been removed, and so that the food simply drops to the floor upon being swallowed. Visceral. Okay, can I unpack this little paragraph? So, um, I mean, this relates to my experience of like reading and consuming information, like going through books and material, to the degree that that's done in a indiscriminate and voracious and famished way. It can just keep going indefinitely, and represent sort of raw consumption at a propositional level. Um, it doesn't seem to imbibe the things it consumes, meaning if I just sort of kept reading, kept reading and kept reading and didn't really take in the meaning of what I was reading, the significance of it, the import, if I didn't import the substance into my understanding of reality, then I would be a zombie. And this is part of the reason for my sharing is to take what I've understood mentally and bring it down to earth, bring it down into my own life. So that's what allows me to say participation, hopefully, in what comes after the meaning crisis. Um, yeah, a craving becomes its nature. I would say I'm certainly familiar with the symptomatology of addiction, and dopamine addiction and phones and the lower angels of our nature and Jonathan Haidt's work and Tristan Harris, and just in my personal experience, the world that we live in is one that is highly stimulating and that can be very addictive in many different ways. Um, yeah, this next page, 15, is where my thoughts about this sort of really take off. I'm going to do a little bit of that now. It's going to be slow in this way. I like to do things thoroughly, and so I'm going to be going through and reading quotes and then talking about how I interpret them, how I understand them. Um, One second. So this is an extension. We've been looking at section 3, which is like the qualities of the zombie that are relevant to the meaning crisis. We've been exploring zombies don't talk, zombies are communal, zombies are homeless, and zombies eat brains. And we're going to go on through zombies are ugly, zombies are not evil, zombies are heedless, and zombies are untouchable, all of which are really interesting. And we're staying with the extension on page 15 of Zombies Eat Brains. I'm talking about what that means. So I'm going to read part of it. Zombies are a brain-oriented monster in operation, appetite, and vulnerability. Interestingly, in many accounts of the zombie, the only way to kill a zombie is by destroying its brain, if you will, obliterating mind to obliterate mindlessness. We can find a strange twist tucked into this pattern that the mindlessness evinced by the zombie is begotten by its brain. Zombies are a perversion of mind precisely because they notably lack the properties of mind we think fundamentally human, yet they visibly want to acquire mind in the most literal sense of acquisition. I'm going to pause and try and unpack um, what I think this, what I think the meaning that the authors intended, and then the other meanings that I pick up. So, zombies are a brain-oriented monster in operation. Um, what does it mean that by operation? Um, Well, by appetite, it's obvious they want to eat brains, right? Vulnerability is also obvious. You kill them by stabbing them in the brain. Um, Operation, I guess you could say, um, they're kind of like humans whose brains have been infected. Maybe it's like the zombies work as zombies by something wrong with their brains. This is an operation. Zombies are a brain-oriented monster in these different ways. Um, Interestingly, in many accounts of the zombie, yeah, the only way to kill a zombie is by destroying his brain. Um, if you will, obliterating mind to obliterate mindlessness. So this is an interesting moment of sort of circularity that gets introduced. There's a self-referentiality that starts to be implied or evoked. Um, what I'm noticing here is that the statement, if you will, sort of, if you will, saying sort of asking for permission, asking for license to say something that is maybe not quite accurate, but like we're sort of evoking or what Jung would call amplifying um, one particular meaning. So um, I would say truthfully, it would be obliterating mindlessness to destroy mindlessness because the zombies don't have mind, which is the whole point. So it's not, we're not actually obliterating mind to obliterate mindlessness. Um, we're obliterating mindlessness to destroy mindlessness. Um, why is that important? I'm, let's keep going and hopefully its importance will be revealed. Um, yeah, it says we can find a strange twist tucked into this pattern that the mindlessness evinced by the zombie is begotten by its brain. Okay, this is a really interesting sentence. So one of the keys that came to me when reading this is the idea that and the authors quite explicitly, and like I've participated in these situations where there's a sort of um, meta perspectival third person sense of unity, sense of common unity, community, or communion um, that is present. And I believe that this third person presence, if you like, um, is something that the authors have a felt sense of participation in. And I believe that the subjective awareness of that presence is itself subject to the symptomatology of the meaning crisis. Um, and we're hoping to, this is why I talked about debriding. I'm hoping to discern um, the qualities or aspects of this third person awareness that are subject to nihilism and the meaning crisis, and the qualities or aspects that are immune or anti-fragile to those symptoms. And so at an unconscious level, I think talking about the zombie is what Jung might call a confession. I so it sounds pejorative, but I don't mean it in that way. So I'm saying that to the degree that the third person presence that is uh, present in the text, to the degree that that is subject to the meaning crisis, it can be referred to as the zombie. And this is one way, this is a key, this is one way of reading what follows. Um, and what this allows is that these symptoms, like to the degree that the meaning crisis is something that we're all subject to, right? So I'm not singling out the authors in any way or accusing them in any way by suggesting this or offering my own interpretation. Um, I hear mixed signal in the text, and I'm trying to unpack that because, for example, one of the things that you surely would have noted about this text already is that, um, forgive me, John, if John ever watches this, but it uses an awful lot of words to describe something which isn't quite so, doesn't need to be so complicated. Um, and I'm someone who really suffers, like I relate to that very strongly, which, believe it or not. And I just feel that I need to define evinced for a second. Can you excuse my all grammar? Define evinced. Evinced means reveal the presence of or indicates. Yes, that's exactly the correct word. Ironic. Um, the mindlessness, which is indicated, which is evinced by the zombie, is begotten by its brain. So there's a way that the reader, when reading a text like this, can be infected. This is dramatic language, right? Infected with the mindlessness of the zombie because of the overpowered brains of the authors who are like incredible humans, right? But it's they're very clever, and they show that in their use of terminology. This yeah is so the mindlessness which can be shared with the audience um is begotten by its brain, by its thinking capacity, by the propositional function, by propositional knowing at a first person level. Um, yeah, when it says we can find a strange twist tucked into this pattern, I believe this is the um, I would regard this one way of seeing this as the unconscious speaking in a way, so anticipating the confession. So I would read that as I would read this pattern as the following passage. So we can find a strange twist tucked into the following passage. Um, yep. And so yeah, and so I'm saying that the authors uh, represent um, multiple things beyond themselves. So of course they represent themselves, but they also represent um, the spirit of the zombie and the spirit of the meaning crisis. They sort of exemplify or demonstrate the spirit of the meaning crisis in talking about it, and they also uh, represent the solution. They participate in the solution, the response, the rebirth of God. And what we're doing is unpacking this text to discern the difference and help distinguish these. This is my intention anyway. I've noticed that I need to stop for a while, so I'll see you later.